Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Marco,
Sean,
it's good to talk.
Yeah, that's what we do. It's our job. I mean, if I
is
didn't like it would be horrible.
That's right. And sometimes a one-on-one conversation is good. Sometimes you need the one to many. Sometimes the many to many. Different situations call for different types of talks and desired outcomes probably as well. And I mean, it's something we've been talking about with respect to cybersecurity, right? Making the connection between the CISO and the rest of the C-suite, and having the language and the skills and the tools to have that conversation, one-on-one, one to many, whatever it might be. And we've made progress, but there's more to do. And I think that's why the crew at Infosecurity Europe in London for the conference this year have invited our guest to be a keynote speaker. And with that, as part of our coverage of Infosecurity London, I'm thrilled to have Paul Watts on. Paul, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well. Great. So thanks for having me along, and music to my ears. You know, the power of communication when talking about cybersecurity is absolutely key. And we still get it wrong from time to time. So I think it's an interesting topic to discuss.
Yeah, and more, I have to say, for my own delight, which I love storytelling, it's turning into that. And even when we cover events, there are more episodes of getting together, telling stories, not just about the technology. It's about translating the conversation, involving more people in the conversation. So we know you have a couple of sessions there, but I would say before we get to that, who is Paul Watts?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Let's unravel
philosophical, but you don't need to go there.
I was born at a very early age. No, seriously. So I've been working in IT for approaching 30 years now, which reminds me very much of my own mortality. But let's move on from that. And I've been working in cyber now for around about 18 years in a variety of leadership roles. And I've had the great privilege to work in sectors such as financial services, critical national infrastructure, fast food, retail, analytics, market research, and and I've had a great time doing it. And I've got the scars to prove it, like every other security leader. And just seeing the evolution of our tradecraft as technology has become normalized and mainstream. It's moved from being business supporting to business enabling to now practically the business. You know, we woke up one morning and we found that the blasted computers were running everything. So so the way that we've had to take that conversation forward has equally changed over the years as technology has become, you know, more accessible and easier to use by everybody. So why come and talk to us in the first place? And I think that's the recurring theme of the 2 or 3 sessions that I will be having at Infosecurity Europe next week.
I love it. And I often heard this from somebody, and I was thinking maybe your last name might be Daniels, and there's that infamous question: what first attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels? Ms. Merton show. But anyway, that's joke aside. I'll use that as kind of a tipping off point of that. That's an obvious question to an obvious answer, right? But for those, I'll have to include the link for somebody to read what that's all about. But the point is, you ask an obvious question to get an obvious answer. It's not always obvious, either side, and what might be obvious to you might not be obvious to the other person, and vice versa. So maybe talk to me a little bit about kind of level setting the Captain Obvious bar, if you will.
Well, I mean, It's actually quite straightforward. So let's take a typical scenario. So my wife will come up to me and she will say, "Paul, I'm thirsty." And I'll go to the kitchen and I'll turn on the faucet and I'll make her a glass of water. I'll put it in front of her and I go, "Well, there you go." She look at me, she go, "What's this?" So, "Well, you said you were thirsty." She said, "No, but I want a hot drink with sugar in it and one of those little umbrellas." And actually, what that's calling out is a problem that's blighted software delivery for many years, which is understand the customer requirement, and understand where the value is. So when you think about that in the context of security, there's no point in coming to me with something and saying, "Oh, look what I've made," and I say, "No, well, you can't use that; it's illegal." And I say, "Well, at what point were you going to tell me that?" "Well, at what point were you going to ask me?" And then you realise that fundamentally the two conversations never had an opportunity to start in the first place. And what's the consequence of that? Well, people cross the sidewalk, cross the street to avoid us because, well, security just gets in the way. It's a blocker. It's not making me successful. It's not allowing me to do things. It's slowing me down. It's costing me burden. It's adding friction. Nothing could be further from the truth, because security professionals don't come to work to be willfully obstructive. And back to the analogy of I want a drink or what type of drink you want, it starts with a conversation. Ergo, the title of my throwdown on the first day of Infosecurity Europe is "It's Good to Talk," because it absolutely is. So that's kind of where the start point from it, Sean. Really, to be honest, the power of communication.
So sometimes I look back, and then I'm relatively new in the industry. Let's say 7, 8 years, and I come from communication, branding, marketing. So there you talk a lot,
Mm.
but you tried always to understand the business. And at the beginning, 7, 8 years ago, which seems a long time ago now, it was what you said. I mean, you can't do this, you can't do that, but I've seen changes. I've seen a lot more communication. But do you think we are there yet, or we're really far from it?
I think we're heading in the right direction. And I think you make a really good point, Marco. So my first security leadership job was in financial services, heavily regulated. And if you wanted to do anything, you had to jump through certain hoops. And I was one of those hoops. So everything came past my desk and I had the opportunity to rubber stamp it or say, no, go rework that, do it again. But the reality was you had to pass my rules. Otherwise, thou shalt not pass. And as technology has become easier to use from the mainstream, the reality is the business can then kind of sidle around us, and they've chosen to do that. So I think we've had to almost reinvent ourselves overnight, really. Now we don't have the rule book to wave in the air and say, you've got to cross my palm with silver, or this conversation or this thing isn't happening. We've actually had to become marketeers overnight. So where's the value in having a conversation with me? Well, the reality is, if you put something out that's inherently insecure, there be dragons. And we know what happens when those dragons bite. Now, nobody wants to feel the wrath of a breach or a loss of service or poor reputational damage or financial loss. So what security leaders and their teams have done is they've started to play on that to say, well, I can reduce the opportunity of that happening for you if we have a conversation at the appropriate time. And the language has moved from a no, but to a yes, and because of that, we've started to enable the conversations to happen at the appropriate point. So actually then security baked into those life cycles of projects and product development become less intrusive, and we're working together. And I use an analogy, I'll just share this with you. I talk about security and how it's changed over the years using the phrase done for and with. In the old days, security was done to a business, very heavy duty controls, policies that couldn't be overcome. Then we were doing it for the business because everybody appreciated that they needed to be done, but the business wasn't really that interested. So we were doing it for the business because we were saving them from themselves, which is still a little bit rude, really, because we're kind of suggesting that the business are idiots, which is what we used to say. But I think we've kind of moved away from that now. We're now moving into a world where security is done with the business because we have a constructive, collaborative relationship. where we recognize, we look across the desk at each other and we say, we want the same things. We want prosperity, we want profit, we want margin, and we want success. And we're coming at it from slightly different angles, but we absolutely amplify the likelihood of us achieving those outcomes if we work in unison and we work together and we work in harmony. So now security is done with the business.
Love it.
Yep. And so another one of your sessions at the conference is on the workforce.
Yeah.
And so taking what you just said, I mean, when I hear the term cybersecurity and workforce, I'm thinking analysts and people deploying protection technologies, and kind of the core of the InfoSec workforce. Is how do you view it as an analyst, and especially given the points of having conversations and the fact that we're doing stuff with the business, so you have app development and operations and whatnot. So your view on the workforce, are we kind of, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
So this is a really interesting point, Sean. I'm glad that you've raised it. And I don't want to give too much away because I really want our listeners to be coming to Infosecurity and hearing it for themselves. But let's just talk about this a little bit, because I think it is really relevant. One of the challenges we've had as we've evolved as security practitioners, or we've started to find that value of engagement with the business, is we still have what I would describe as blind spots. Now, I've been around for a long, long time. And the reality of it is that people of my generation came from a highly technical background. So we learned the tradecraft of cyber information security through the technology of that medium. And what I think that's done is that's inhibited our broader development, and it stifles the way that we engage with business. So what do I mean by that? I make a call to our industry and a call to the academia and the classrooms that are bringing the next generation workforce together. We absolutely need a diversity of skills in the cyber security workforce. And I use the phrase, bring me the creatives. I'll share a story with you, if I may. So when I was working for the UK railroad operator, this was back in sort of 2014, 2015, we were really struggling to land our communications campaign. We were doing a big cybersecurity transformation program. And, suits like me were trying to tell the business that it's really important and follow these tips. And it was all very mechanical, and it didn't really resonate. It didn't work particularly well. And I was standing in a coffee queue and a young lady called Georgina came up to me. And Georgina was a communications and branding executive. She did internal communications and program communicating with the public and so on and so forth. And she said, see what you're trying to do. And I think I can help, but I don't know anything about cybersecurity. And I said, I don't care. Let me buy you a coffee. And we sat down and she said, look, you're missing fundamental basics of marketing and communications. You've got to understand the groups that you're communicating to, understand your core messages, translate them so that they resonate, strike an empathetic pitch with the people that you're trying to talk to. And she reconstructed the way that we did that communication and awareness, and it was an absolute slam dunk. And from that point on, I was sold that actually we were part of the problem, because we recognize now that we needed humanities students, artists, visual people, and we needed those skills to be brought into the tradecraft of cybersecurity. Now, herein lies a problem, and this is the slightly controversial thing that I'm going to surface at Infosecurity Europe next week. We need to acknowledge that we've got blind spots. So as security leaders, we have to acknowledge the fact that we need to recognize that we need those broader skills to augment what we know over the years of experience that we've gained, to be absolutely nailing the relationship with our business and driving true business value. Now, that's a hard thing to say to a security leader who's been around 20 years and thinks they know it all. They don't. And the market for our trade skills has changed. And if we don't change with the demands of our consumer, we then start to lose relevance. And that potentially becomes a problem down the line. And one of the things that I do some lecturing at universities, which I'm absolutely privileged to do. And it feels right because you're paying forward. And I say to them, what are you being taught about marketing and communications and this? And they say, well, no, I know how to, all this technical stuff and the business of risk management. So I look at the lecturers and I say, you're letting these students down, because they need to be entering our industry with a breadth of skills that transcend just the technicalities of doing cybersecurity. And I think that's vitally important, and we need to be doing more of that. Sorry, I get on my soapbox a little bit because I do feel quite strongly about that, but hopefully that's answered your question, Sean.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I have a comment on that, if Sean, if I can, quickly.
Course.
I think it applies to a lot of other industries. I give you an example. Medical industry, doctors. When you go and you need to have people's skills. It's not just about telling this is what you got and this is what you have to do to get cured. You need that interrelationship skills. And I was talking to actually the former CEO of Kaiser Permanente here, and he was talking about these things. Like, we need to insert in the curriculum of medical doctor psychology and the way that you communicate with people. And I can think many other industry that do that. So I'm 100% with you on this for Infosecurity.
I totally agree. A little bit of bedside manner goes a very, very long way, especially if you do take the old school approach and you rampage into a project meeting and go, stop everything, because you've not filled in form A123-54C and you can't proceed past stage gate 3 until everyone just look at you going, this guy's always going to be found in the kitchen at parties. You've got to match. It's match pitch. Read the room is basic emotional intelligence, and unfortunately, it's sadly lacking in a number of areas. And Marco, your point is well made. This isn't just something that cyber has to worry about. This is, many industries where, the importance of that resonating relationship, finding that impasse between the two of you, getting past it is so important.
So many questions in my mind. I feel like we could just wrap for the whole day here, but I want to connect it to one of your other sessions around outsmarting the cyber criminals, because what I'm hearing here is understanding the business, right? Being part or being with the business. So that assumes you have some vision of where you want to go and how you want to get there, and then you throw regulation into the mix, right? Kind of to your point, well, you can go there, but only if you pass through these gates successfully, which kind of could slow things down, and in some cases you can't get around those. So how does cybersecurity play a role there? And then we have the cyber criminals who have neither of those constraints, right? They don't have to abide by the ethics of the company or achieve the same growth rates and have issues with staffing and things like that and education. And there are no boundaries from a compliance perspective. They just go. So there's this race between the tortoise and the hare, and one of them is wearing a big backpack lugging them down, and the other is just kind of flying freely. So how do you, tying in that third session that you're part of, I think that's a panel discussion with a few folks.
Yeah.
How does that change the conversation?
I think we are moving away from the world of managing risk versus reward, and we're now actually talking about the language of business resiliency. What do I mean by that? Spoiler alert, getting breached is no longer a matter of if, it's now a matter of when. So we need to think about how we drive the agility into our people, our process, and our technologies so that we can spot these things quickly. We can act swiftly to contain and limit the damage. Now, in order to do that, you have to be thinking about security from cradle to grave, and you're selling the importance of security being something that threads itself right the way through business. But now it's not a question of measure and countermeasure. You've always got to be ready for the inevitable to happen. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to take a slow approach. We've just exited from a big global pandemic. The markets are in a bit of a mess. You're earning every dime, cent, and dollar that's afforded to you. It's a very competitive world. And organizations still need that competitive edge. They need that ability to innovate. They need that ability to be out front. And it's absolutely possible to do that and be resilient. But what you need is agility, both on the side of security and on the side of business as well. And this kind of brings me back to the importance of communication and collaboration, and it being a two-way street. You know, if we're having the conversations about, we want to use, I don't know, let's talk about AI, everybody else is, damn it, let's get on the bandwagon right here. Let's talk about ChatGPT. Great. What do you want to use it for?
Great conversation there.
What are the pros? What are the cons? Let's go into this with our eyes really, really wide open. Because if we don't, and the business says, well, we're just going to go and do this anyway, we'll just kind of give Paul a swerve and we just won't talk to him, and then something happens, we know what happens. The business come back to us and go, how did you let that happen? Why was your SOC not detecting that? And why didn't this happen? And why? Well, we need to have that balanced conversation between the two of us, right? The other thing is to think like an attacker. So the importance of, you know, regularly rehearsing, using red teaming, blue teaming, purple teaming, just making sure that your skills are honed, situational awareness, making sure that your workforce is operating in a culture of being able to feel comfortable to say, I think there's a problem here, or I think I clicked on something I shouldn't, or I think I might have done a thing, rather than say, this is going to get me fired. So I'm just not going to say anything. And in the meantime, you've got an attacker in your environment moving laterally, and you know what happens next. So there's a number of moving parts that allow us to behave in the way that we need to behave. And it just comes back to the importance of recognizing that change is a two-way street. There's things that we need to do differently, and we're starting to change. There's things that the business need to do to pull their weight, and they need to be able to change as well. So there's a lot to unpack there. I appreciate that. I think if you want to hear more, you're going to have to come to London, right?
Yep, that's a panel
Absolutely.
to partake in for sure.
Yeah.
Yep, a lot to think there, and it made me think about some other conversation we had, Sean, in the past about trust. Is not about, I'm going to trust you if you tell me that I'm going to be unhackable, unbeatable, if you're going to protect me 100%. It's to say, I'll do my best. And my best, it's a two-way things like communication. It's not just this department, it's everybody as a culture that we do something about it. So I think you can look at it from that perspective, which bring back the soft skill of communication. So we've gone the full circle here, right?
I think it's also important to recognize the cyclical nature of the world that we operate in, because, as I said, there's a lot of moving parts. So the business is now moving at breakneck speed. It's innovating as quickly as possible to stay competitive. We're trying new things. We're playing with ChatGPT. We're playing with new technology. We're embracing automation. The threat actors are just as innovative, and they're trying new cool stuff as well. I mean, I shouldn't really be calling it cool, but they're as creative and innovative as we are. So we have to be as cool and innovative and as agile as they are. You've also got to have the outlight. You've got to have your people looking into the future. The organization that I work for, the Information Security Forum, we have a paper called Threat Horizon. And it's very, very popular because what we're doing is we're encouraging both technology and business stakeholders to think about the things that could be influencing them in the future. So you think about the threat landscape, but you think about that in the context of your organization's strategy. And you have to be interested in the organization's strategy. So it's not just about a risk practitioner managing a risk register. It's about thinking about the ultimate outcomes you're trying to drive and taking early action so that when the worst happens, when, not if, you're ready for it. If your competitors aren't doing that, they're immediately on the back foot when the next threat lands, and they've got to think about what they're going to do. And in the meantime, you're flying because you've already got a plan A, B, and C, and you're off. You've got the competitive edge. That's why it's so important, and it changes over and over and over again. It's just a merry-go-round. I talk to people and they say, "We've just completed a 5-year cybersecurity transformation program." Mic drop. And I go, "Great. What next?
Take it
Because
back up again.
there isn't a beginning, a middle, or an end. Now
That's
tell
right.
me how you're going to sustain that. And they went, oh, well, I haven't told the board that it's going to cost them 20 million US to run this every year. I was like, well, I think you probably need to do that pretty quick, to be fair, because they now think they're secure because you've just delivered that 5-year program. But the world's changed. Now you've got to start over and again and again and again.
Yep.
Yeah, and every industry is different. I remember working with some defense departments in the U.S. government when I was working for a security company. And the life cycle of those programs, I mean, you're behind before you start almost, and then 5 years later you're implementing what you defined 5 years ago, and it's crazy. So having a regular conversation, regardless of what the plan looks like, I think ultimately really matters.
It's interesting as well, Sean. So, not wishing to come back to AI and machine learning, but it's the hot topic. There's this expectation that the law lords and the regulators are going to catch up and they're going to show us the path to righteousness and set out what's right and what's wrong. Now, look, we've been around for a while and we know that this isn't going to happen. It's going to take legislators time to catch up. We also have geopolitical rifts now. So our determination of what's morally and ethically right for AI and ML in one part of the planet may be different or perceived differently in another. So we have to unpick all of that. But the reality is this technology is here today and we've got to deal with it today, which means that we've got to decide our own rights and wrongs and our own risks and rewards if we want to leverage this technology to remain competitive. And when the legislation catches up, we will have to adapt to become compliant to it. I don't think we're ever going to be in a situation where the rules of the road will be set before we set off down the road. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of being in that position, but that makes it all the more important for security leaders and their teams to be having constant progressive conversations and relationships with the business so that when they're thinking about doing something, they say, I'm going to hang out with the security guys and get their take on this. Because I want to start off in the right direction. Because if it turns out 3 years from now, they was completely the wrong direction, well, what am I going to do? Well, I can take the CISO out the back and fire him. You know, that's sport, right? That's generally what happens, isn't it? Blame the security guy. But that's not how we want this to be. You know, we don't want to be, operating, looking over our shoulder, worrying about, where the next blade's going to come from. We want this to be a nurturing relationship in a culture that's fresh and invigorating and innovative and not stifled and governed by rules and by fear. We want to change. So, that's the journey that security is trying to take itself on.
Yeah. And firing the CISO doesn't solve the problem.
Doesn't solve the problem because you've still got a mess to clean up. That is a scapegoat, and that's just not the right answer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, so many things to talk about. We can't do that all here. You have 3 sessions, Security in the Business. It's Good to Talk on Tuesday, the 20th, 11:45, 11:55. You have a panel on outsmarting cyber criminals. That's also on Tuesday. It looks like it's just after that. So kind of, you have your short burst and then a nice chat to break that apart a bit. And then on Wednesday, well, you have a trio of things here. You have managing the current demands of a cyber workforce whilst looking to secure the workforce of the future. That's nearly 2:00, just before 2, to have
a lot to unpick.
Okay.
I'm very grateful that I've been given the three sessions. And look, I mean, I'd love to continue this conversation with your good selves, and no doubt we'll get an opportunity next week. And call out to others who are going to attend Infosecurity Europe. I'll be around for at least the first 2 days, maybe the third. Come and have a conversation. There's a lot to unpick here.
It's good to talk. So I hear.
It's good to talk. You've passed.
You learned the lesson, and I think the lesson here is that if half of our conversation there and anybody that comes to London to the event are as 1/5 as interesting as this one we just had with you, I think we're all in for a really great event. So I invite everybody to come and join your session, but also, like you said, to hang out, take the opportunity, mingle, network, and rethink the power of Infosecurity. Excel London, the 20th, 21st, 22nd June, 2023.
Yep.
And we'll see you all there.
Yeah.
Be there.
We'll
Be there or
link-
be
link-
square.
Be there. Be
We'll
there.
link
Be
to
square.
Paul's sessions in the show notes, and we touched on a few topics, Marco, that we've had conversations about as well. So we'll link to those so people can get a head start. And of course, stay tuned. We have a lot more coverage coming this week and throughout the conference itself. So we look forward to sharing those stories with you, and hopefully you becoming part of them as well. So, Paul, thanks again for your time, and good luck next week with the sessions and the conversations. And see everybody there.
Enjoyed the conversation, gents. Thank you very much. See you next week.
See ya.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSPmagazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.